too much really. Right, good evening everyone. On a fine, beautiful summer's evening. So welcome councillors, officers and members of the public, which are not at the moment, to the meeting of the Governance Committee. Reminder, switch off your mobile phones or turn them on silent. There are members of the public press attending the meeting virtually. Now, the meeting is being recorded and will be available in due course on the council's YouTube channel. Reminder for councillors to ensure that those attending virtually can hear the proceedings, and for the recording to capture the entire meeting, please ensure you project your voice and speak clearly. Please remember it's a formal meeting and therefore do not refer to each other by first names. Thank you very much. So first item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
I've received apologies from councillors Phillips, Turton, Bushell and Tops, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on 15th of November 2022, pages 7 to 14. Councillor Walker moved, seconded Councillor
Just checking I was there. Wasn't like.
Seconded Councillor Henderson. Right, that's passed. Thank you very much. Item 3, items brought forward which in the opinion of the chair should be considered by the meeting as a matter of urgency. I'd just like to point out here what I would like to do so officers can leave after the item 6 is to bring the audit tracker recommendation forward to just after item 6 because Jeremy Mann is also responsible for some of those items on there. If that's approved by the committee. Yeah, thank you. We'll do that. Declarations of interest. Anybody got any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. To agree the agenda between Part A and Part B. Thank you. Councillor Anderson, Councillor Walker, thank you. So Part A, update on planning service. Head of Planning, Housing and Health to report. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your committee's interest in planning service. I'm delighted to introduce Tracy Blackmore, who's still relatively new to the organisation, started in October of last year as a service manager for planning. And Tracy is going to talk through our processes regarding requests for extension of time in relation to applications to give you hopefully confidence in the current arrangements.
Okay, thank you. So yes, so my name is Tracy Blackmore. I have been here since October. It's not longer, sorry. I don't know if that's a good thing, I'm sure it is. You probably, some of you recognise me because I used to work for North Devon Council about 4 years ago. So I've been here as a planner, senior planner, and then I sort of recently rejoined again as the service manager and development management. At quite a challenging time, I think, probably for planning, but also for local government. It's quite an interesting time. And I think generally, I'm really pleased to be able to support some of my existing planning officers who I know have had quite a challenging time. So I'm here to talk to you about extensions of time. So I'm going to start with really boring legal basis of extensions of time, and then it is going to get better and more exciting. So the legal basis for an extension of time. So sorry if I'm going to say how to subheads in terms of if it's too dumbed down. So in terms of Article 34 of the Town and Country Planning Order 2015 sets out requirements for all councils to give applicants notice of determination of a valid planning application. So we have a duty as a council to determine a planning application when it's valid within a specific time period. So the minor development would be within an 8-week period, and a major development would be within either 13 weeks or 16 weeks if it's something called EIA development. Generally, it's 8 weeks or 13 weeks. So 8 weeks of minor development, 13 weeks for a major development. So a major development would be anything over 10 dwellings. Minor application would be, as I say, household extension, anything under 10 dwellings, a conversion, that type of much more minor development. So we have to have that statutory time period to determine an application. So the Article 34 allowed us to not only have that statutory time period, but allow us to also have, if we couldn't do it within those 8 to 13 weeks, to have an agreement called an extension of time. So that has to be a formal written agreement with the applicant and the local planning authority to say, okay, for certain reasons, we cannot determine it within 8 weeks or 13 weeks. Between us, we would have a written agreement to say then the time period, so it has to be a specific date, and it will be determined by this date. And there would have to be a good justified reason why we couldn't determine the application within that 8-week period. So why is there a need for an extension of time? So for major applications, it's a little bit more clear cut. So major planning applications are quite complex. They're quite hard to deal with. They engage a lot of technical consultees who we don't necessarily have any control over in terms of what they're going to say and in what time period. It's likely that they may report them to a planning committee, or if they're not policy compliant, they need to go to a planning committee. They couldn't be delegated through a planning officer. And equally, these larger complex applications would also need something called a Section 106 legal agreement, which again does take a longer time period to get through. Not necessarily only because we've got a fantastic legal team here, but we also dependent on solicitors in terms of the applicant solicitors as well. So in terms of the minor applications, equally they're not always easy, and the National Planning Policy Framework allows us to proactively work to secure development that's high quality. So in the event the application is unacceptable in principle, my planners should be automatically refusing that application. There shouldn't be any reason why we should be seeking an extension of time. The principle of an application is unacceptable in a certain location. However much you amend it, the principle would always be unacceptable. Whereas there's some applications where the principle is acceptable, but we would like a much better quality development. So the materials, the size, there's a flooding issue that can be mitigated, doesn't offer biodiversity net gain. So we then allow that additional time for the applicant. So we set out why the application currently isn't acceptable, and we give a time period where we would want the applicant to undertake a certain amount of work to ensure that application then was better quality and could be approved. We have a really good positive approval rate. I would say 97% of our applications are approved, and that the extension of time allows us to do that. We could, and there is some authorities that take the decision to refuse all applications within 8 weeks. I don't necessarily feel that gives the good customer care in terms of actually a refused application is quite negative, particularly when I say the principle is acceptable, but there are certain areas that need to be amended to allow that development to be acceptable and to be granted. So generally, if there's a solution that can be achieved, we will generally not seek to refuse the application. We would ask for that extension of time. Extension of times are also really important because if we don't get the extension of time and the application goes over 26 weeks, the applicant can quite rightly ask for their money back, which is massive consequences for us as a planning department. So we would only need 2 or 3 applications to not have a secured extension of time and go over that 26-week period. And some of those larger applications with the larger fee can be 2 or 3 planning officers. Unfortunately, there are companies out there who are ringing up applicants on our website and saying, actually, if you haven't been secured an extension of time, there is a way of getting your money back for this. So So there's two elements really to it. The extension of time are really important where the development is, the principle of development is acceptable, but we are wanting to get some high quality development. But equally, the extension of the time are important in terms of our fee income, that we're not losing that. And equally, I think completely honest with you, we are not fully resourced. We've gone out twice in terms of the last couple of months, and the senior planning officers and for a lead office position, and we're not getting any applicants. And we're certainly not getting applicants that are experienced. Unfortunately, it's not just a North Devon case, it is a South West and probably a UK issue that a lot of planners are going into the private sector where they are potentially better paid. And local government isn't necessarily seen as an attractive career aspiration. Very different from when I first joined, and I certainly, I really enjoy my local government working. So I think generally something we do need to think about in terms of encouraging people to join local government and being a flexible working and offering a really good pension. But currently we are where we are in terms of we just cannot get experienced planning officers to join our council. So again, we haven't got those funds on seats to necessarily. We can't stop any applications coming in. We can't say we haven't got staff. We have to determine them. So again, that extension of time allows us to do that, and again, be much more proactive in terms of finding solutions, which again is in terms of that customer care is helping them. That hopefully gives you a little bit of a kind of background on terms of the extensions of time. So if anyone's got any questions, I'm sure they have. In terms of that process, then I'll be happy to answer those.
Councillor Anderson?
It'd be quite useful. So if I wear my county hat very briefly, I've got 14 or 16 parishes, I'll never remember now.
Yeah.
One of the big things that comes up as I go around, there's always issues over planning. Because of the delays.
Yeah.
It is what it is, and with the district house on the South Island, I know there's a couple there which have sat there and maybe going over to them, but it might be really useful. And I'm sure you're going to be doing this to send this out to parishes with what you're suggesting, just to make them feel a bit more inclusive. I mean, certainly from my parishes, so I run from Chumley up to the Crem up here. Mm-hmm. They've all got quite a degree of sympathy with the planning departments. They know the pressures you're under. So I don't think the criticism that maybe was there before isn't there now, and it's really good that something is happening. But it'd be quite good to have that information to go out to the parishes and say, look, this is something we're doing to tackle it. It would just ease off some of the pressures.
That's certainly something I could look at doing. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Little
Councillor Walker?
then what the sort of addition to that is the and there's no, I know there's absolutely nothing that can be done about this, but is the is the parish's response. So I know I'm very lucky in as much as there's only one parish that I'm in, but it's a big one.
Yeah.
And it means we get quite a lot of planning applications.
Yeah.
But if they come in at the wrong time, often we miss the date and the application's been determined.
Yeah, so
That's
you could an extension of time, which a lot of parish and town councils do, and we do grant those extensions of time and would wait for that. So I guess it's being in regular communication with the planners and just ensuring that, you secure that extension of time and they wait for that extension of time. And if that isn't happening, let me know.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure that they are waiting for your comments on that.
Yeah.
Lovely. I mean, the only other thing that I would suggest, that I learned from a LGA meeting the other day was sometimes planners are very risk adverse in respect of this, sometimes with the extension of time. This is why it takes some so that, but at the end of the day, I learned from the LGA. Often we usually quote here in North Devon, the Environment Agency says there's a flooding risk, particularly around, say, like Tull Vale area, for example. There's a flooding risk, when actually there's loads of developments there already where people are sleeping on that sort of level. And I mentioned this at an LGA meeting, saying, well, someone wants to just use that room now as a bedroom, but actually they're on an higher level than the housing development next door, where they're all sleeping at lower ground or below ground. And the advisor said that actually there is nothing to say that they can't be approved. It's just that, because at the end of the day, the planners are the one that makes the decision. They only have to take the Environment Agency's advice if they want to. If you think that, you know, it's going to be another 60 years before there's a major flood, then there's no reason to go against it. And that's one thing that I learned, that actually the power lies with the planning officer to determine it. Is that right?
So the consultees, technical consultees, you're right, are only consultees. So the planners are the actual facilitators for making that decision. So equally, the Environment Agency, the Highway Authority, Natural England are consultees to that process. They are technical consultees, but we do have that planning balance. So we would say if there's an objection, being that flood risk or highways, we would then have to make that tilted balance that the benefits of that development would outweigh any harm. So that's where that planning balance would come into. We can do that, but equally we also may say the harm in terms of that flood risk, in terms of that vulnerable use, would outweigh any of the benefits. So yes, the consultees are consultees. They have no, I think apart from major applications on Environment Agency, they can pull that into Secretary of State, particularly for minor development. Then it's up for us to make that decision. But equally, we are subject to judicial review. So anyone reading through our delegated report would need to clearly understand that we've taken that into consideration, that objection, and why we decided to override that. And that's not necessarily something we take lightly. But we have done it before, but equally, we are a competent professional authority and we should be taking into consideration all consultee responses.
Jack, can I follow up on that? Because as Tracy said, the planning just isn't black and white. And there is a duty on us as a local planning authority and on the planning committee when it meets to take all material considerations into account, all material planning considerations. And that's a legal duty enshrined in the legislation. And certainly, the fact that it's in a flood risk area or the EA is saying that it could be subject to a 60-year flood or whatever it would be, that would be a material planning consideration, which the planning officers or the planning committee would have to take into account as part of that decision. You're right, they don't have to slavishly follow it, but they have to balance it up with all the other considerations. So they'd weigh that against the policies in the local plan, the need for housing, all the other material planning considerations and weigh it up. And Tracy's absolutely right. If you get that balance wrong, or if you ignore a material planning consideration, or you take into account something that isn't material, then you could be subject to judicial review. And even if you do take into account all of the right material planning considerations, if your balancing up exercise is so unreasonable that no reasonable authority would take that decision, then again, that would be deemed to be an unlawful decision and subject to challenge through the courts. So it's really difficult for the planning committee and for the officers to do that balancing up exercise. But you're right. The core principle is you don't have to slavishly follow what the Highway Authority say or what the Environment Agency say. You've got to consider it as a round with all the other material considerations that come forward.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Might just raise on floor, that's right.
And this is a question that's nothing to do with extension of time, but I've noticed something, had a planning application today come through, which has been withdrawn by the planning department. What does that actually mean?
So that would mean that the applicant has withdrawn the application and no longer wants the authority or council to accept the application. So there's potentially probably concerns with it. So rather than taking a refusal, they would ask that the application be withdrawn. So it's withdrawn from our system and no longer being considered by us.
That makes sense, yeah, thank you.
So you reiterated this, Tracy, thank you very much. For example, we have just had submitted a 415 dwelling application to the council, haven't we? That's been in the news, Devon Live, all that sort of thing. From the information you give us tonight, from the, when they submit that application, are they under the 13-week rule?
They would be, because there'd be major applications. In fact, there'd be 16, because they're EIA development, so 16 weeks.
Right, okay. So that'd be 16 weeks, and then
Yeah.
if there's any extension, we'd have to
So,
agree with
so
the
that
applicant.
would have to be agreed by the applicant and the council. So equally, if it was called into a planning committee, obviously that only happens once a month. So we would then need to take that into account in terms of that time period being determined.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just raise one other thing as well? Because when this was originally raised, I think that members wanted some explanation about the extensions of time, because it was a little bit opaque, I suppose, because we report to members on how many applications are determined within the deadlines, etc. But the deadline is the 16 weeks plus the extension. And so to be more transparent, over the last few months, we have started reporting how many are actually determined within the 16 weeks or the 8 weeks. So members can see what the proportion is. So you can see how many are determined within the extended period and how many are actually determined within the original time period of 8 weeks or 16 weeks. And that's on the quarterly business report that comes to you.
Right. And how are we performing on that, Teresa?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add also to that, you know, planning officers, sort of contrary to some beliefs, we would like to deal with planning applications. We don't want them sat on our desk.
Yeah.
So when they come in, you know, particularly the principles not exceptional, we want to get them out quite quickly, because it doesn't do us any good, and it also gives the applicant slightly false hope. If we ask for extension of time, well, we know we're going to refuse it. So we do try and deal with those ones that aren't acceptable in quite a timely manner. It's a really hard balancing act, isn't it? And I mean, I'm going to say this because they are my planners, but I generally don't think any of them are sat there twiddling their thumbs asking for extensions of time. There are genuinely good reasons that they want to have better quality development, or equally that they want to have that positive customer reaction in terms of, okay, well, actually what you've submitted isn't quite right, but you can do some amendments, and then that would then fit with the policy, and you get a positive decision. So it's getting that balance, isn't it? Or, I mean, and you know, I've been doing planning for a long time. I don't necessarily agree that the deadlines are a good, you know, even if someone had 100% deadline of getting those 8-week periods done, does that make a good quality decision? Not necessarily, but equally I can understand there has to be some sort of criteria to judge planning authorities. But I think, you know, the planning advisory service equally says that doesn't necessarily, just the time in terms of the time we're taking doesn't mean that's good quality decisions. It can be poor quality decisions, but they're all done within 8 weeks. So I think what I want to bring is some reassurance that, you know, where we know that it's not going to be acceptable, we refuse the application, where, you know, where we feel that the principle is acceptable, we do seek an extension of time to get a good quality decision through and to get that positive customer service. That we're not just refusing applications, which can be very frustrating when they don't know why it's been refused. We do try and communicate, you know, why it's been refused or how you can get a positive decision. And that's why we, you know, allow for extensions of time. We have got, you know, we probably say 97% of our applications are approved, and we have got a very good appeals record in terms of, you know, the last 2 years. I think there've been probably 3 or 4 that have been allowed. The majority are dismissed, which again is a really good record of actually the officers making those right decisions. It's not an ideal world, and you know we don't live in an ideal world, and staffing is a problem for me, particularly getting experienced planning officers. But all my planners are doing a really hard job in terms of, you know, they are heavily resourced and they've all got heavy workloads, but they are, you know, trying their best. So I think if anything comes out today, that's kind of what I want to kind of get that message across. And obviously I'm now in place, so if things aren't working or there's frustrations in parishes or applications you feel aren't progressing, please come and speak to me. And, you know, I am a bit of a dog of a bone. I will then try and find that out why that's not progressing, and, you know, and get back to you and then for you then to understand. You know, I think there has been a little bit of a thing of perhaps the plan is not necessarily always communicating. So that's something again I'm trying to address with them. Because, you know, I just think communication is key, isn't it? In terms of if a planning decision hasn't been made, that's communicating why that's not been made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the committee can be reassured with what you've said, and for you to take up the position, thank you very much. Thanks for applying for the job. And if you can do anything for any other planners to apply, please let us know.
I'll try.
Please let yourself know. It is very important, and I do understand that around the country there is a big problem with planners because they can leave and go and work for an agency or for themselves, and they can then choose when they want to work, and they can also offer what price they're going to ask for their services. I know it's a big problem, and maybe we can address that as a council going forward by giving planning permission for key worker housing as part of our sort of area to recruit and retain staff. But I think it's very valuable what you've said. And I think that one thing that has come about this is that we've got someone who we can go to.
Yeah, definitely.
And instead of going around different planners,
Yeah,
we can come to
Just come to me.
Tracy Blackmore for that, which is really good. Thank you.
Don't look at your inbox tomorrow morning.
They'll all be from Council NDC. Yeah. So for that part of the agenda, is there anything else that we'd like to ask or anybody else?
Comment really, thank you for explaining that. So now what I take away from this is that actually we're not asking for extensions because we've run out of time to do things. We're asking for extensions so we can make the best decisions. Yeah, that's very reassuring.
All right, I'll move that we note that report. And can I just say thank you to Tracy for that? And what I'm going to do now is bring forward item 11 for those in the room. Item 11 to the audit recommendation tracker and a report by the Chief Executive.
Chair. Start off as I normally start off. This is the normal report that you get each time. So you've got the different appendices. Appendix 1 lists the sort of open audit recommendations. Appendix B is the appendix which lists those recommendations which have been closed since the last committee. You can see that's quite lengthy. And then Appendix C, which is usually the appendix that we have most discussion about, is the appendix that lists the outstanding audit recommendations where a revision to the date has been requested, and we've got a few of those. As normal, I don't know whether you want me to go through each of those individually, but the first one, for instance, you'll see that the request has been submitted to extend until the 30th of June. And that's because we've got some supply chain issues in procuring the equipment that we need. But we're hopeful that the work will be completed by the end of February, so to give some leeway, we're talking about June. Then we have the refresher training for members, and that was the prevent training and safeguard training. And as we've said there in the latest note, an extension has been requested until the end of February. Training has been set up for January, February, but obviously it won't have been done before the provisional due date, which was November. But that is set up, so that will be completed in February. We've then got some training that was organised, but had to be postponed after the Queen's death. And that was to do with members in their role within civil emergencies. Alex has put a note in here which highlights the fact that there are some training opportunities that have been delivered for 11 communities together. But what we're recommending is that the training actually takes place after the next elections now, because obviously we'll have a new crop of members coming in May. So trying to deliver organised training before May now is probably a little bit superfluous. So we're asking for an extension of time until December this year to allow that training to take place alongside all the other training that members will approve at full council tomorrow night. Next one. And this is the one I think that probably involves Jeremy and Tracy. This was a recommendation based on some work that was undertaken to try and speed up some of the responses that we were getting from some of the statutory consultees. And I think Tracy did some work with the Highways Department and County Council to try and speed that up. And the recommendation was about extending that learning to the other consultees that we might have. It's for them to talk to it if you like, but for me, that's an ongoing process because it's probably not just a quick fix. To agree a process with the Highway Authority, for instance, and then just forget about it. It's about building a relationship with those consultees and making sure that those consultees are aware of the implications of timely, or the positive implications of timely responses. And that's an ongoing process, not something that you can just do once and then forget about. So the revised date is the 28th of February on that one. Next one is about identifying fraud through our revenues team and housing benefit and council tax team. We've requested an extension until August 23 on this one. It is in the service plan and that date coincides with the service plan date. I think I'm right in saying that this hasn't been progressed at the moment simply because of the number of new responsibilities that have been imposed on that team over the last couple of years. And even now, they've been tasked by central government with delivering the next phase of the electricity. I can't remember the actual name of the scheme now, but it's effectively the benefits scheme that allows certain people to have money off their electricity, etc. That's going to be delivered through that team. So again, there's new responsibilities, but we're hoping that 31st of August should be sufficient to allow that exercise to take place. And then a couple of others. One is about bringing a report which identifies the benefits of bringing the park service in-house. That's scheduled to go to strategy and resources in March. So we're asking for an extension until the end of March to coincide with that. Next one is the security awareness module. The team have been looking around. There is no identified provider that can do that off the shelf, if you like. So we're looking at creating our own training module for teams. We do have, and I should say, just because that's not been completed yet, doesn't mean to say that we're ignoring cybersecurity completely. We have a process of training members of staff through Boxfish and members as well, and that's been put in place. But this will be carried out by the 20th of February. I think that's it in Appendix C. So those are the ones where we've asked for an extension. There aren't any listed in Appendix D, and Appendix C is a list of the actions that are included within the annual governance statement. And you'll see the list there. A number of those are about 100%. Some are still in progression. I think the only one that is still being progressed and is just slipping past its due date is the 21 AGS 05 about producing the annual quality report. And you'll see from the note that all of the community data has been uploaded to our website, and it was just waiting for the council data on our workforce to follow. I've spoken to the head of organisational development this morning, and that will be completed during this month in January. So it's just with her to check the data before it goes on the website. So that has slipped past the 31st of December deadline, but by the next meeting that will be completed. So there's no due date, no revised due date requested because that's going to be done in the next couple of weeks. But I think in terms of all the others, they are still within their due date if they've not been completed. So the recommendation is to note the report, Chair, and to agree the extensions that I've just outlined.
Right, okay. So obviously, while we've got you here, Tracy and Jeremy, is am I supposed to have Mrs. Blackmore listed now? But there you go. is the 22 PO2, which is the new service manager development management. That's you, is it now, Tracy? Yeah, we'll be contacting all consultees to remind them of the importance of receiving responses in a timely manner. So you've already answered that question, I think, from the previous item. And that's obviously involving Devon County IOs.
Yeah.
Me and Councillor Anderson are both county councillors, so we just mentioned that.
Yeah.
The Devon County Council.
Actually, I was just going to say, having read that, because all the county councillors, because you've got Councillor Biederman, you've got Councillor Lever, you've got Councillor Davis, Yabsley, Councillor Room myself, we're all district councillors as well. So if you're finding a blockage with Devon County,
Yeah.
whichever one of the water comes in,
Yeah.
why don't you speak to us?
Yeah.
Because we can then shake them by the neck, and it might be a bit quicker than if you have to follow through a formal step. So I mean, I'm quite happy to do that because, you know, that's what we're there to do. You know, if something needs to be spent along with Matt Collins or whatever, the quick call, it might just say, I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. I think we should take that. I mean, you know, generally I have a good relationship with Devon County on
Yeah.
my way, but equally to have your support would be very good.
Sometimes it can just help.
Yeah,
And, you know, the county councillors aren't just there for the residents, they're there
No.
to help everybody.
Yeah.
So if you or any other departments facing a problem, blockage, speak to one of us. Yeah, I'm quite happy to help on that.
And role reversal will come to you, Tracy, if the county are having any problems.
There's that inbox filling up again.
Yeah. Now, members, is any item so that we can, because I know that you've got to go away and do a briefing. But I think the one thing, main thing to say here, and we keep banging on about it, Ken, and I know that you were doing this through SMT, is that when service managers are absolutely requesting these extensions, that they give us a realistic date, because what doesn't look good is then if it passes the 28th of February because something else has come in, and then we're asking it for again for March, is actually to make these dates realistic, because if it keeps coming back, it looks like we're underperforming. And, you know, and for accountability reasons, I think we just need to make sure these request dates are actually dates that they've actually sat down and thought, this is going to be the date that I'm going to get this done, because it doesn't look too good to the public every time it keeps coming to us. And I know that over the years, this has got vastly improved with the amount on here, and SMT have got a lot better at putting realistic dates in.
Yeah, and well, I would like to stake my career on it, obviously, in my life, but I'm pretty sure these are realistic dates. Yeah, absolutely.
Chair, do you mind if I just say something? So obviously these are internal recommendations. I suppose what I would also add is it would be probably useful if where an extension is requested, there's some sort of detail about the risk that may or may not be tolerated as a result of this.
Yeah.
And I know that obviously one of the first recommendations being extended is our high cyber one. And I suppose that one you would perhaps expect a bit more detail about what is the risk of not being able to do it for another 6 months.
Yes, I totally agree. So we can, it's open and transparent that members are aware of the risks. I think that's important. So maybe we could take that point on, Ken, for you to talk.
Yeah, and I mean, if I was more expert on that subject, I might be able to answer it at the moment, but I can't, unfortunately. But yeah, we can take that back.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, so the recommendations are as said by the CEO. Do we have an approver? Yeah. And seconded Councillor Walker. That's the audit recommendation tracker. Done with then. Thank you very much for attending this evening. So now we'll go straight on to item 7 now, members, which is internal audit progress report, pages 15 to 32, report by Devon Audit Partnership.
Yes, good evening. So Paul Bass from Devon Audit Partnership. So presenting the update report. So as you can see, starting with page 16, the council is on track for reasonable assurance. The chart on the right shows the 3 substantial, 7 reasonable, and 2 limited reports that we provided today. Actually, I provided that to 10 reasonable assurance reports based upon some recent reports.
Sorry, Paul, can you just say that again?
Yes, so
You amended.
So there are now three substantial, 10 reasonable, and 2 limited. So that's subsequent to the issue of papers. So obviously just increasing the number of reasonable reports. In terms of the sort of summary of the audit reports we've issued, so as you can see, we've provided substantial for creditors. We know that the progress continues to be made to improve to increase the number of invoices paid on time. I think the current rate is 90%, and there's sort of objective to increase that to sort of 96% of invoices paid. The other reports we report on are all unreasonable. So car parking, so provide reasonable there. So that's an improvement from our limited report last time. So you obviously note that the sort of controls have improved. There's more performance monitoring, although there's that's an area where more could be done. And also we've sort of identified perhaps there needs to be more thought about how car parking relates to the sort of environmental and local area strategy and so on. So because obviously car parking, cars in the summer has a big impact on the event in the area. Recruitment, so yeah, no significant concerns. We've obviously highlighted perhaps more recent training for managers would be beneficial. The use flight trends, which is our new sort of recruitment, the new HR system is beneficial. Reducing the amount of paperwork and so on, so it can all be done electronically. We looked at customer service centre, so yes, we thought it was a good initial service that allowed a lot of sort of initial requests and sort of comments and complaints to be but there was limited visibility of how calls are subsequently handled by service areas. So one service area might be a lot better than another, but essentially there's not that visibility. And so you can't really address it. So we know there's a new sort of plan system being brought in that should hopefully provide that visibility. We looked at the program management office team. Again, we saw it was building capability, and the team members were very experienced and qualified and so on, and were really sort of having, I thought a big impact on the different programs. And we just sort of think that they need to be a bit clearer about providing clarity about how programs are going, what the risk factors are they meeting the objectives and so on. So but there's a good progress report anyway. And then the Tarka Leisure Centre, so again we looked at that. Obviously a lot of work underway to ensure that any sort of building issues are rectified, having just sort of transited from building to operation. And they also need to put in to start putting in sort of performance measures to monitor the work of contractor to ensure that the contractor is actually delivering what it needs to deliver. So as you can see, Appendix 1 provides a bit more detail on those audits. I just mentioned counter fraud, so in line with what we've done in other districts, we'll be undertaking a counter fraud risk assessment, and we will report on that in the next audit committee. So that will be reviewing the counter fraud strategy and plan and other documents and so on, and providing assessment. Also, just to update you on the proposal for a review of the single persons discount. So Devon County Council has agreed to fund this exercise and agreed that we can go down the single tender route. So as we don't need to complete it, so we can just identify a single agency and contract them to undertake a review of single person discounts for council tax. And then just mention risk management. So it is in our plan, and we'll be doing an audit on risk management in this quarter, starting in February. So again, we'll report back to the committee on what we think of risk management. I know that a lot of work is being done by officers on improving risk management. And then just to mention Appendix 2. So I think I mentioned I was doing some work to, I suppose, review the work of audit committees in the districts, and Appendix 2 sort of summarises what different audit committees do. You'll see there's a lot of disparity. Some look at a lot of papers, others have fewer papers. I sort of comment that everyone is sort of doing what we need to do in terms of looking at internal audit and external audit and governance reports and so on. There are some examples of, I suppose, what I'd say was good practice that I identified, and I think we ourselves will be taking examples of that and sort of saying to different districts, well, you know, this district does that, perhaps you should consider it. But I think there's a useful exercise for you, and hopefully you can use it to inform what you include in your agenda items and so on going forward. So that's a sort of summary. Happy to take any questions from you.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thanks. Just coming back, essentially on page 6, I think, under the car parking, I'm just, sorry, I'm a simple soul, I'm getting old. I'm just a little bit confused because you've got a sentence in there, no parking services business plan or strategy exists detailing aims and objectives for the team to work towards with regard to the corporate plan and climate change requirements. So car park revenue is actually really important for North Devon Council. Just put the charges up because it's a really major revenue stream. So on the one hand, it's really important for the council. On the other hand, we've got the auditors sitting there saying, hang on a minute, you need to have to think about car parks, should be shutting them down because it might damage the environment. So that's just how I've read that straight as it is. So it's almost like there's a criticism coming in because there isn't any work being done, but actually it's a really important part of the income for the council. So for me at the moment, it's just like that, having read that. I don't know if you can expand on that.
Well, I think you summarised it completely. So I suppose, I mean, you could, so if it's a big city, you could say, okay, car parking strategy needed in a big city. But then you say, okay, it's a district. Is a car parking strategy needed for a district or North Devon? Perhaps not. At the same time, you might expect to see, okay, there will be consideration in some sort of environmental policy or planning and so on. So we didn't really see that. And I know your point about the revenue. I mean, there's cost of benefits of having electric cars coming to the area with lots of people, but then there's environmental stuff. You know, these are all pros and cons of cars and so on. So
It's kind of like a happy balance.
it is, and I suppose we'd like some sort of more recognition in a strategy or business plan about, you know, what is a function, and is it to generate more car parking spaces or revenue, or is it to deter too many car parks, too many car parking in the summer areas, summer times, or what is it? So
It's going to be hard.
I think Mr. Triggs wants to come in.
Yeah, just to add to that, I suppose we do include some elements of parking in the search plans. And so for those members that were obviously developed last Thursday, saw the service plan presented. So part of Sarah Jones' service plan does include elements on parking within it. We also did have a parking strategy vision a few years ago, which was parked for the time being. And that is going to be picked up again as part of the sort of the Barnstable vision work, because obviously that will look at what we're doing in Barnstable with obviously things such as Green Lanes, Future High Streets Fund. Obviously we've got the car park at Green Lanes now, so the next piece of work really is to look at the car parks we do own, which ones are utilised, which ones are not utilised, and then look at a future strategy around that. So it is a piece of work that we've identified needs to be done, but it's something that really is sort of something that will come forward in the future. So what's been identified on the service plan at the moment is around things around maintenance and planned works on car parks. but that needs to fit into a wider piece of work around what we're going to do with the future of our car parks as well. It's no point spending a fortune in terms of resurfacing car parks. If that car park's underutilised, then we might have a different need for that in the future. So it is something that is coming, has been sort of flagged up in the service plan around looking at a planned maintenance programme for those car parks.
That doesn't quite tick off the environmental concerns that have been raised by you though. So are you looking at like potentially having a carbon offset against the car parking? So each car parking space could say, well, actually over the course of the year, we generate, if it's not an electric car, we generate this much. And so it's almost like doing a carbon offset with tree planting or whatever. This is where I'm a bit confused about. I'll take your point on what you said. But if we're looking at environmental impact, then you've got to do an offset because you can't not have car parking. Because we're a massive tourist, tourist destination, and it is such a big, a big income. So is it more to do with carbon offset, or so I know it's just one minor point, but I'm really struggling with it at the moment.
Yeah, it's not for me to say. It's a council decision. They need to be a bit more clear about all these different range of aspects, but I do know that obviously there's a decreasing trend to put like electric charging points in car parks. And it's a bit of a win-win situation in terms of the dream would be you've got solar panels on the top. And then you'd have the car parking spaces for electric vehicles who would then charge they will charge and pay you revenue, and then people shop in the shops. So that's what I call win-win-win. But as I said, it's not for me. I just say pointing out perhaps there needs to be more thought about those aspects.
The chief executive wants to come in as well.
I mean,
Mr. Miles.
it's a really interesting point. It is something that's been picked up by members and discussed. For instance, when we looked at the Future High Streets project, by making the car park more usable, and some members quite rightly pointed out, well, should we have a car park? Should we be discouraging people from driving into the town centre and encouraging more public transport? But you've hit the nail on the head, really. The reality is at the moment, bus services are reducing, not increasing. And if we want people to come into our town centre, we are still very much reliant on vehicles. We're not seeing a reduction in usage of our car parks because people are turning to public transport or walking or cycling. If anything, it's completely the opposite. So, we have to satisfy that demand at the moment. I think everybody's ideal would be, to put trees in the car park and not have the cars in there at all. But we're nowhere near that position at the moment. And Paul's absolutely right. We do need to look more at charging points. It's really interesting. I saw something about France, and they're introducing legislation which says that all car parks over a certain size have to have a canopy with solar panels on the top, and that would be brilliant. But we know from the struggles that we went through just to get the charging points that we've got now, we don't have the infrastructure in place for the electrical infrastructure to be able to roll that out. So in this area of the country, we're very much dependent on that infrastructure improving, and so we are pushing through to Western Power, or National Grid now as they're called, to try and improve that, but that's on a regional basis. But you're absolutely right, there is that conflict, and we're seeing it all the time now between the environment and generating income, etc., etc. And I think that's going to become more difficult over the years. Really.
I do see call back the planners.
I do see we've got 250 million quid there.
Should we call back the planners in to say, right, we're going to make a policy. We're in the local plan where we have to put solar panels on every car park.
It's a really interesting.
Might laugh, but it's true.
We've looked at it for out here, for instance, to see whether it's something we could do here. And we have looked at it for other car parks, and there are councils within this country that have done that. And as Paul said, then you can sort of, I don't know the technicalities of it, but plug in your EV charging point to the solar panels, hopefully. But it's costly. And like I said, the electrical infrastructure just doesn't exist. I mean, we're being told by National Grid that Barnstable is pretty much at capacity. So until that's changed, then we're restricted.
Councillor Walker?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if either of the other councillors that are here went to the Western Power presentation day. Going back more than 3 years now, I think, before the pandemic, but they had a big red splotch over Barnstable, basically saying at capacity for both producing and producing electricity, and it until the National Grid do something, we're not going to be able to sort of say, right, this is what we want to do. But from this report, can we make a recommendation that when the parking strategy is restarted, that the environmental impact is included as a major part of this?
I think we would have to look at that.
Yeah.
In terms of, what we do with EV charging points, as well as, should we be using car parking or car parking strategy to discourage car parking within the town centres, etc. So that would be part and parcel of that
I
strategy.
think the start of putting the coastal car park costs up higher than the in Midland ones is a good start, of saying that, yeah, this is an environmental thing as well as a money raising exercise to discourage people from taking their car from their holiday chalet 50 yards down the road to a car park.
Yeah.
So I know it's not very big for the locals, but
Well, thank you. I mean, for me, it'd be nice just to know. Now we've had these EV points put in Bell Meadow and other car parks. On getting a sort of report on the usage.
Yeah.
If we could make a note of someone to sort of find out what the uptake is on those, that'd be really good. The other thing is, if please do not do, I'd like this minuted, is please do not do what we did on the last report when we paid consultants to appraise our car parks. When I asked the question at the time with just how many people rely on parking at night in the car parks because they live on Bear Street, for example, and the usage of the car parks at night is not just for us to know. In other words, we just look at revenue, but actually we're here to provide a public service for the residents as well, and that's also at the night-time economy. So I think it's very important that we make a note that there is lots of residents who park in these car parks at night who rely on that parking being there because they live in flats and other accommodations. So I think it's really important as part of the strategy that we look at that element of nighttime parking for residents who live in that area. Please, that's my thing. Right, so we've looked at this and we've got reasonable assurance on most of it, Paul. And then we've got the substantial assurance on the creditors. And I think for the amount of money that's going through our hands at the moment on behalf of other, government initiatives such as Homes for Ukraine and other things, I think that says a lot. And obviously we haven't listed the housing benefits as well, haven't we? So that's good. You went to Appendix 2, and we were looking for Appendix 2 here because it went on to the areas where we talk about. You've got Appendix A, haven't you? Which I'm sure you was mentioned as Appendix 2.
Yes. Well, it's Appendix 1, Appendix 2.
Yeah, I've got Appendix 2.
Appendix 2, and I think at the back of Appendix 2, you've then got the reports.
Yeah, which is we got in the red, it's Appendix A, isn't it? I was just looking at that one.
Yeah,
I might miss something.
Annex A.
But the outcome from this, I would like to ask you in your own words, Paul, is how do we fare with the amount of reports that we're asking as a council? Because I think we did ask you to do this as a benchmarking exercise, and I can see that there's some things here that only North Devon do, such as compensation payments and delegated powers, and the approval to pay compensation above Officer delegation and all that sort of thing. But there's some things here that we don't do. For example, did I see one here when I was looking at it the other day about ombudsman report review of ombudsman outcomes? I mean, we don't do that in the committee, do we? And I'm thinking it's actually quite a big risk to the council, isn't it, if we don't adhere to these? But it's good for us to look at, and I think going forward for the next sort of administration, if you like, we can look at looking at what we find out of this report maybe as a committee, I don't know, maybe what we should do, what we should be including, what shouldn't be included. Is there some sort of, I know Adam's got absolutely loads of reports to do, and I don't want to put it on him, but do you know what I'm saying? If we can appraise this to see if there's something how we can make our efficiency better as a council.
So can I just suggest, I mean, we are sort of planning some new member training, aren't we? Is it lunchtime?
Yes.
Yeah. So it will be that as part of, you know, sort of future trainings of your committee that we provide a training or session on this in terms of compare and contrast the what audit committees to do. I mean, in terms of your original question, I think, yeah, I think you compare well, but there's one of the benefits, you know, there's areas of good practice which we are seeking to adopt. So I mentioned the annual fraud assessment. This was something Torridge was doing every year. They had an annual fraud assessment. We said, okay, we'll do it across the districts we look after.
Yeah.
You're getting that report in.
And I think the difference is to know that some of these are still run on an executive model, and not all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do understand that aspect of it as well. So it is quite different.
Yeah, also, Chair, depends on delegations in place. Obviously,
Yes.
some authorities
There's lots of other.
delegate a lot more to their audit committees. So at Torridge, for example, they will sign off their accounts, whereas obviously ours do support council for sign off. So it does depend on your constitution as to what types of activity the governance committee would then carry out.
Yes, and what other committees there are within the structure. So some of these, just looking at it like, treasury management report, that would go to policy committee rather than to this committee. So other councils might not have that policy committee set up.
Yeah. Well,
I was just going to mention, Chair, the ombudsman letter that you referred to. Must admit, I did think that did come to us at some stage, but it may well be that that's taken into account as part of the AGS that's produced each year. I think that, the letter that is sent by the ombudsman each year, detailing the number of complaints, etc. I think the summary of that is reported as part of the AGS.
You know, we do get that. See that.
But we can have a look at that anyway, because I think, if it's not dealt with any other way, then I think that probably would be something that should come to this committee.
so Mr. Miles, you can take that forward.
Yeah.
Right. So Paul, thank you very much for the report. And anybody else got any questions? No. So I move that we receive the report and note the report. Yeah. Councillor Anderson, Councillor Walker, all approved. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to, and Paul, thank you for that, really informative, and we do value your contributions as a committee. It certainly does get us thinking and it highlights some issues to us. Item 8, external audit progress report and sector update report by Grant Thornton. Peter Barber, good evening.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, committee. So this is the progress report that we bring to every committee, setting out the position against the 21-22 audit. So the main position on our key responsibilities is set out on page 34 of your papers, headed at progress at January 2023. You'll recall at the last meeting of this committee back in mid-November, we were very close to completing our opinion work ahead of the 30th of November deadline. Very pleased to say that we did get there and conclude our work and issue a unqualified opinion on your 21-22 accounts on the 30th of November in accordance with the deadline. And that placed you in a very small select group of councils nationally. I think it was about 1 in 8, 12% got their accounts signed by that national deadline. And that concluded the main element of our responsibilities for the year in question. In order to complete our audit and issue the certificate confirming completion of the audit, we also need to complete the second responsibility, which is value for money. And as with last year, there is a later reporting deadline for that, which is 3 months from the opinion. So that takes us through to the end of February. And since the last meeting of this committee, good progress has been made on progressing value for money. We've brought in a specialist from our local government advisory team, and he's been working on that and is progressing well, current tense, with the aspiration that the majority of that work is completed and the draft report is drafted later this month, and we very much hope to furnish officers with a first draft of that report later this month, and expect hopefully to finalise it shortly afterwards. And obviously that report will come to this committee in due course. On to page 35. So those two areas are our statutory responsibilities under the Code of Audit Practice. In addition to that, we do undertake certification work for you. And many years ago, districts, this would have involved multiple claims where government funding would have come centrally for specific areas, and we would have been asked to undertake assurance work on the appropriateness of that spend. Over the years, the certification work has diminished, and we're now left with one claim, which is your housing benefit subsidy claim. It's a very large and complex claim, and the deadline for completing that work is the end of January. Work is well progressed and continues, and we very much hope that that deadline is deliverable as well. And as I said, that will be the focus for our work over the next few weeks. So I think that the committee can take strong assurance from the position in relation to 21-22. You know, I do a lot of audits across the southwest. North Devon is the only one I've signed out of my 8 so far, and every year the requirements in terms of officers to produce a complete and accurate set of accounts and of auditors to challenge and be skeptical increases, which means more work for you and your officers, more work for us, and it's becoming a very long and involved process, which has ramifications for us in terms of resourcing, and it has ramifications for you and your finance staff in dealing with auditors and accounts, whilst at the same time managing the internal financial management arrangements. And I think you can take assurance that this is a good outcome for North Devon District Council for 21-22. Chair, as always, the report is in 2 parts. It's the progress, and then from pages 38 onwards, there is just some sector updates. I'm not going to go through those in any detail, but I'm happy to take any questions on progress or the sector update part of the report.
Lovely, thank you very much, Peter. Just one question then on the value for money. You on page 34, and you go down into the audit findings dated 15th of September 2022. You, just to confirm, no weaknesses at all in the commercialisation strategy of the council from your work?
So no significant weaknesses. Work is ongoing, so we were comfortable that there wasn't anything fundamentally amiss there that we needed to bring to your attention at that point in time. And I think we had this conversation last year because last year was the first year of the new NAO VFM code, and there were a lot more improvement recommendations than you would have seen in the previous NAO code approach, which was reporting by exception. I suspect, again, not wanting to preempt, that there will be areas to refine arrangements, possibly in that area and other areas that we will be outlining in that VFM report when it's shared with officers and then finalised.
Lovely. And then the last question, just for transparency really, Peter, is the last question from me. Certification of the council's housing benefit return. What happens if we do not meet the January deadline?
Not a lot really. There would be a requirement to let the DWP know. They get lots of comms from lots of councils saying that the deadline won't be met. You know, we do an awful lot of them as well, and the majority don't get signed by the 31st of January. But if it goes on for too long, then there is an increased pressure. But there are a number of councils where They haven't been signed off for a number of years. I'm not aware of any that have actually taken any had any financial penalties imposed on them for late submission of claims. Clearly, if issues arise from the claims work itself, the audit of the claims itself, and there are overpayments, then they will be clawed back. But no financial penalties, to the best of my knowledge, elsewhere for late submission.
Thank you. Any questions from members? Councillor Henderson, then I've got Councillor Walker.
It's just an observation. I spent 10 years working at the top end of the regional press with some of the biggest groups. I've met some auditors in my time. That is the first time ever I've seen a happy auditor. So thank you very much, Peter. You made me quite happy there. But also, I think it's really important to say thanks to John's team for the actual work that's gone in, because the position that Peter's in to produce a report like that has come from the work that's been done by John and his team. So I think it's really important to back that up. But yeah, happy with that.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just a very, very brief query. Under the certification of council's housing benefit return section, I don't know if I'm reading this wrong, but it says in the text, it says the deadline for the work is 31st January 22, and then the deadline's listed as 23. Is that a typo, or am I reading something wrong?
If it does, I'm struggling to see the 22 at the moment. Sorry, what page was that on?
Page 36. It's right at the bottom.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Yes, I'm a year out. Rest assured, it's not 12 months ago. It's the end of this month.
Thank you.
Apologies.
So, Peter, as an independent auditor of this council, you are quite happy with the accounts of the and the finance team, and absolutely, it's nice to see that you've been able to we've been the first council that you've managed to sign off, and I think that is a true progress. Councillor Henderson says that it's a true testament to how the council's run with the finance, and really good sort of observations from this committee as well. I've got to support my committee members. Is actually with the accountability and the progress. I think it's really important that the work that we've done. Could I request formally then that from this committee that we pass on the congratulations and the comments from both auditors really, but the external auditor that is absolutely pleased, and it's a testament to the staff, John, Mr. Triggs, that we've been able to get to this position and be satisfied our external independent auditors that were signed off the accounts.
Thank you, Jane. I will make sure that's passed on to the wider team. Let's say it's a big team effort, but also it's a team effort from Peter and his team as well. So we've built a very good relationship with them, and obviously we're responsive to them, but they're also very responsive back to us. So it is a two-way process. And I think, as Pete said, there's a number of authorities that haven't had their accounts signed off, not just for last year, but also for earlier years as well. So I think it's testament to the council that we've managed to get them signed off. But also, I think it hopefully reassures members here that we're in a good position. And even with the housing benefit claim still to be done by the end of January, that is normally signed off by the end of January. We've never had one that hasn't been signed off. So we're confident that will be the process. If that doesn't get to that point, is we would need to notify DWP, but as Peter says, we'll hopefully be in a position where that will get signed off by the end of this month.
So, I mean, I'm satisfied as a representative to our residents that our residents should be really pleased with that outcome. So, Peter, please pass on to your staff and your auditors who have worked with the council to get this work progressed and get it signed off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well done.
So, no more questions from members? No. So, please may we approve that report? Yeah, all approved. Thank you very much, Peter. Let's go on to the next item, which is the polling places designations, pages 45 to 56. Report by Head of Governance, Adam Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report looks to update members on the list of polling places or polling stations to be used for the district parish elections in May 23. The main changes are highlighted blue in Appendix A to the report, but include using St John's Community Centre for Barnstable Fortress Ward. This is just outside the polling district. No alternative could be found, and a private garage at 31 Linscott Crescent being used for Yanand. This was previously a private garage before, but at a different property. The Governance Committee is asked to recommend this list of polling places to full council. Happy to take on precedence.
Councillor Walker.
Quickly, you're saying about St John's Community Centre being slightly outside of the area. Obviously, some of the Bickington Ward one of the Bickington Ward ones is also outside of the area. So this is done as and when needed, I assume.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
And when we say slightly outside the area, it is literally just the other side of the road, so.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the community centre at Sainsbury's isn't in our ward, but it's closer than the Tomlin Hall is, which is the next nearest polling centre. And I apologise in advance that the Tomlin Hall are putting their fees up for this year. That might be my fault.
So, members, we have the report of the polling stations. So the Government Committee recommends to full council that the proposed polling places for the district and parish councils in May 23 as contained Appendix A be adopted. All in favour? Thank you very much, Adam. Item 10, update on governance arrangement following review of the committee system, pages 57 to 64, Director of Resources and Deputy Chief Executive, Mr. Triggs to report, appendix attached.
Thank you, Chair. So members, this review follows a review that we said would take place after 12 months to review the governance arrangements with the current committee system. Kate kindly sent out a survey to all 41 councillors. There were 16 responses, which gives us a 40% response rate. So it would have been nice to have had more responses, but we were faced with only a 40% response rate. Of that response rate, about half were members pre-2019 and half members were new members. So it does give us a sort of balanced view in terms of the questions that were asked. There were 7 questions asked, and these are summarised in graphical form and also with some comments in your papers set out starting on page 55. I'll just run through the questions and some of the comments that were raised, and then just give a quick summary in terms of where we are. So the first question was around, do you feel engaged and involved in decision making? And 87% of respondees said yes. Some quite positive comments around most decisions involve all council members. Even though I don't sit on committees, I do get to feed in either by attending or by a group representative. In the past, the cabinet model was only made up of the boarding group, so virtually 50% of councillors were completely excluded previously. Regular group meetings allow members to comment on the agenda. So there's obviously some positive points there in terms of involvement in decision makings. A couple of sort of negative comments around mixed feelings around feeling at times that the committee are effectively rubber stamping decisions with made by officers. Obviously officers do present the reports, and that is something that I've obviously did come up under the peer review in terms of maybe members taking a bit more involvement in presenting reports moving forwards. Other councils, quite a lot of lead members do present reports rather than officers, so that might potentially then negate that feeling that obviously officers are presenting the reports and decisions being rubber stamped. So that's something that we can obviously pick up and continue moving forwards following the elections again. The turning over to the next part of the page, again, positive comments around being part of a cross-party committee. Everyone gets an equal say on their opinions. Some answered sort of partly mainly due to working full time, and obviously meetings generally held in the day. And that does come up as a theme through a couple of the other answers through the survey results as well. So again, something that we can look at moving forwards in terms of timeliness of meetings. Again, in terms of attracting new members in, and obviously people that are working. So obviously all the challenging meetings are held during the day, but there's that balance to be found as we've experienced over previous years. Second question's around obviously whether there's any advantages or disadvantages of the committee system. Again, it was answered 50-50, so quite a split in terms of whether people found any advantages or disadvantages. Again, comments around reflecting the political makeup of the council, which obviously differs to the previous executive model. Quite a bit of feeling throughout this, and also other questions around the portfolio holders should be on strategy and resources. Otherwise, they're disengaged from the decision-making process. That did come up in a couple of answers. Again, comments around it's a fair democratic way to run the council, that it is inclusive as well, even though one member did say that the process can be slow. Third question was around where you were North Devon councillor prior to May. Again, this is where the 50-50 split came up. If you did answer yes, you feel more or less involved in decision making with the committee system than the previous model. Again, positive comments around being far more involved, etc. So again, quite a lot of positivity around the involvement. Fourth question around, do you consider the committee system allowing for quick decision making? There was some comments in there around it's far better than a committee that has a wide representation of members than the previous leader making decisions with little or no debates. So again, it's referring back to that inclusiveness and cross-party. If people answered no, what improvements she said could be made? There were posts put forward around sort of delegated powers of chairs and lead members, delegation of more decisions to chairmen of committees and officers. I think this cropped up before, again, something around the fact that we can't do delegated decisions to chairs of committees
Not to,
under the current committee structure.
yeah, we can't delegate to individual councillors. So,
Obviously differs to the previous model that we had under the executive model.
Just a point of thinking. I mean, I didn't make that comment.
Yep.
But if the constitution said you could, and it was approved by full council, then could you? No. Can't change the
no,
constitution.
that was one of the disadvantages of the committee system. But when we changed to a committee system and when we were comparing it with the executive system, what we saw was that although you can delegate to individual councillors under an executive system, this authority had never done that. So in practice, it's no different to we were under the executive system, but technically, if you're an executive council, then you could delegate to portfolio holders, to chairs of committees, etc.
Thank you.
81% consider the committee system ensures quality decision making. Again, quite a strong response on that question. Were there any improvements that could be made to the current committee system? So even obviously, though people were very positive about the current system, there were some proposals put forward, but I'll come on to that as part of my conclusion. And then the final question was around training, and is there any training that you would find beneficial following the elections? A couple of points there around obviously training around things such as the potential impact and implications to government requirement for photo ID to vote. So this is around training following the election, but obviously that's coming in for this election. So again, probably more important to understand that in advance of 2023 elections. There is some national comms that's gone out this week around the voter ID changes, and then also some local communications here. And we have got some information on our website around the changes that are coming in. So again, we can point members to the local communications that's on there. In terms of the overall position for those 7 questions, again, just to summarise, so 87% of respondents did feel engaged and were involved in that decision-making process now. Around 70% felt the committee system allows for quick decision-making. And around 81% feel the committee system ensures quality decision making. So some quite strong positive response is from those that did respond. However, even though those positive responses, around 3/4 of respondents did say there could be some improvements still to the current system, such as involving the LGA more often in reviews. As I touched on, portfolio holders being on strategy and resources, that was a theme that came through in a couple of questions. There was one proposal about committee chairs providing short verbal updates before council, which would provide a flavour of the work of that committee. So that is done through the governance committee. So you as chair obviously do provide a report 6 monthly, I think it is, to full council on the work that's done by the committee. So one of the responses was obviously, well, that would be quite nice to see that from other committees as well around the work that's done. The role of policy development could do a more meaningful role, was mentioned. Putting members into the relevant committee, that did come up on the governance questionnaire that we did when we did the effectiveness of the governance committee around making sure we've got appropriate qualified people on committees. So again, the way our committees are allocated, that's done via group leaders through the full council process. But that is something that we can feed back to group leaders and make that. And also, again, the mention of more evening meetings came through in a couple of the responses as well. Training ideas that came out post the elections in 2023, having more training in the evening and or making the sessions available online so that members can review those at pace. Obviously, some of the training sessions are held during the day, but again, we could record those via Microsoft Teams and make them available so those members that maybe can't attend those sessions during the day, at least then could attend those sessions at a time that's more convenient for those.
They do that at county, don't they?
Yeah. So again, that's something we can look to do as part of the training programme that we rolled out for 2023. So Chair, overall, I think it's a positive endorsement of the committee system, albeit we only had 40% response rate. Some good feedback and some good improvement suggestions that we can take on board and look at moving forwards in 2023. I suppose the only question I've got then, would you like those survey results circulated to all members? Because obviously not everybody responded, but the reports come here tonight. I don't know whether you want that circulated to all members.
Open and transparency, yes. I don't know what the members think.
No,
Yeah, true.
So we can ask Kate to circulate that to all members, so then obviously they can see the responses that have come through. And then Chair, the recommendation is that members note the report on the governance arrangements following a review of the committee system.
Yeah, members, do we note?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all noted, okay. Thank you very much for that piece of work, and thank you to the clerk for putting lovely drafts together.
Kate did the work.
Yeah. It's nice to see that, and for me, from a personal perspective, I think the committee system, having been part of both systems, an executive model and a committee system, is that as an opposition party, if you like, in a executive model, you turn up and you don't always get heard because the decisions have already been taken. I'd like to think, especially on this committee, that whoever is the ruling party anyway, in a committee system, I think your voice does get heard. So you're not sort of disadvantaged. So that's one way I like about what I do like about the committee system. I don't know if anybody else has got anything to say on this.
I agree with what you said, Ian. It's
I think it's more inclusive.
yeah, definitely. And it means that people who are not from the ruling party, who have got very good ideas, are heard as well as the ones who are from the ruling party.
But there you are, Paul. We've got some very good ideas.
Probably that's good. That.
Lovely. So yes, we've done that. Thank you very much. Now we're on to the work programme 22-23, which is item 12, pages 93 to 96, to consider the work programme attached. We did move things about previously, didn't we, Ken?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Miles.
Yeah. Not really what we moved now, but we certainly did review it last time.
Yeah. Can I just ask, what was I going to say from that thing now? There's about some risk, we just mentioned something previously, and I'm thinking about, do we need to add that to the risk register, but I can't remember what it was. Never mind. It'll come to you. Right, members, we've got this on your pages, the work programme going forward. Obviously, we'll be in another administration going forward, so people might, or actually, no, this is all this council, isn't it?
Yeah, next meeting's in March.
Yeah. Were we going to add something to the March meeting from our discussion earlier, Mr. Triggs?
No, I don't think we were, because we, just for members' benefit, we talked about a new format, the corporate risk register, which obviously is one of the next items on the agenda. And we've reviewed the risk management framework of the corporate risk register, and how that sits with the service risk registers. So slightly new reporting formats, that will come to your March committee. And then we were going to talk through that new report at that meeting. So we're going to do it as a separate item. We're just going to do it as part of presenting the corporate risk register.
I know what it was. what came up, my head's just jiggling here, was the new voter ID system. Of course, in my view, if you can't afford a driving licence, you can't afford a passport, which the majority of people from sort of the areas that I'm from, or you're not old enough to have a bus pass, or any other forms of IDs, what that's done is placed a big pressure on this council to actually issue a scheme that is going to, so people can apply whatever to say this is my identification, that to vote. I think it's going to disparage, my own personal view is I think it's going to discourage people who are younger or people who are from you know, not very affluent families, to discourage them from voting because they can't afford a passport, they can't afford a driving licence. And I'm just thinking that the government, what they've done is put the pressure onto us as a council and our resources to come up with some idea where there's going to be a scheme. And not everybody can go online to register. And the elections are only in May. I'd like to say, do we need to put that on the corporate registration? That's all I'm saying, is because obviously it's going to be a lot of resources for the council that we don't even know how many yet, we can guess, but.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're coming, but I mean, we have got plans in place, and we have identified the need to put more resource into that area. We just need to identify that resource, but the reality is, yeah, we've got to do it, and it's got to be done pretty quickly.
Are we getting any extra money for that?
Yeah, there is new burdens funding for elements of it.
Okay.
So, you know, that will certainly assist, and that even extends to things like buying digital cameras and stuff like that. But there is a reasonable estimation as to how many people have photographic ID already within the community. So we can assume a certain number of people will be approaching us. And as John alluded to earlier, you know, the communications has just started to go out now. And I'm not sure when the scheme's open. I don't think it's open yet, is it? There's
Not open yet.
No, it's the 20th of January, actually, yeah.
So 20th of January, that'll open up and people will be able to start making an application online. And the communications that we've put out just recently do say, you know, urge people to do that. And also make reference to the fact that they can also apply for postal votes, because if you apply for a postal vote, then obviously that photographic ID isn't required. So yeah, we're making plans anyway to ensure that it's introduced successfully.
Yeah.
It is on our service risk register, it just hasn't escalated to the
No,
risk.
yes, it seems just fine, so I just know that the resources there, it's gonna have an impact from what I've listened to and in other domains, and it's good to know that we've got plans there, but also I can see someone turning up to polling station saying I want to vote and not know anything about this because they live in a different sort of world, if you like, and turning up expecting to vote, and how do the staff handle that? And obviously there could be some sort of maybe aggression at some stage, frustration that they can't vote, and so therefore I think we need to consider that as well. But yeah, Councillor Walker, sorry.
Yeah, fairly minor point, but not for the people who would be involved in it. One of the forms of ID that you can use is a blue badge. Can we have it put down for polling day that if blue badge is missing from the car and only the clock is there, the reason for that would be that they've had to take it into the polling station to use it and not find people. That could be an issue.
Yeah, and that's something we could certainly give a warning to our guys about. Yeah,
and the second brief point is great that we have online forms. I mean, personally, I think online forms are marvellous, but we do have quite a substantial section of the population that, if you mention the word computer, they'd grow up with the thought of having to use one. And so is there going to be a paper-based alternative?
Yeah, that people will be able to come into Linton House, and they'll be able to receive assistance from the staff there, both in terms of taking a photograph and making the application online.
Fantastic.
So it would still be done online,
Yeah,
but it would be with the
they'd have to
assistance of
have
staff.
to do it, yeah. what's needed.
I think there's going to be a lot of older people that are really going to struggle with this. I mean, certainly in South Molton, surrounding parishes there. I mean, most people, not most people, a lot of people still got to pay for driving license. They don't even have a photo ID. And you'd be amazed how many come in and get passport pictures from me. Or, yeah, I got to get this done. It's all falling to pieces. And it happens all the time. And I think, yeah, there's going to be an element of the youngsters, but I think there's going to be a huge number of 55, 60s and overs actually have got no photo ID simply because of the nature of the country. I think it's going to be a major problem, So I guess the shortcut on that one is to really encourage the postal voting until something's sorted out, because from the NDC's point of view, it will be a logistical nightmare trying to get photo IDs done even from now until polling day. There's such a short space of time now, really.
Yeah.
Well, I don't envy you on that one. I actually really don't.
It's almost like the council want to do its own postal vote awareness schemes in the comms, maybe, so we can put comms there.
The national comms doesn't really highlight the availability of postal votes, but we've talked about it. We've said that locally we will start to do that. I mean, the comms that have gone out now have been pretty much based on the national stuff. But when we start putting out some more local stuff through social media, then we'll highlight postal votes.
Let's hope they don't go on strike.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right, because that age group that are less likely to have photographic ID are also the age group that are more likely to vote. So yeah, there is a risk, yeah, that people will come into the polling station, want to vote and not have any photographic ID. We will have more staff in the polling stations where appropriate, and we'll also have more polling station inspectors touring around to try and resolve any issues. But yeah, I have no doubt people will expect to be able to vote and not be able to.
It's almost like, just a thought's gone through my head here, and is that at each district ward, at a ward level, you can say, go to that polling station there because your application your application for ID. You could go along and have it done there and then. Do you get the meaning? Actually, on polling day, actually, you can go there and get it, so you've got your ID if you haven't got it.
There's a cut-off date, which is but they have to have the application in. And then there's emergency proxies, I think, after that.
Yeah, I think they've got 5 or 6 days before the date of the election to get their paperwork into.
We are putting comms out by a whole range of different methods. So there'll be something going out in all the council tax bills. So even if people aren't on social media or picking up on the radio or the other press, then the council tax bill that everybody gets will have a leaflet in the. So
yeah. It's probably worth putting a bit over onto the parish councils as well, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, it's those parish councils that are being elected. So actually, it might be worth shifting some of that weight over to them.
We'll put out as much as we can, and then there'll be the national communications as well.
it will get ramped up quite soon.
Yeah. What, something that's just gone through my mind is at the moment you can, if you haven't posted your postal vote by polling day, you can drop it in a polling station. Will you still be able to do that?
Yeah. And you can see that it is gaining traction already, because we put something out on our social media, which was then put on North Devon News, and I think that's got about 260 comments already. So it's getting in public awareness.
Yeah, I have seen some of them comments. So right, thanks for that. So we've got a work programme. Are we happy with that, members? Yeah, all fine. So we'll accept that. And then we go into part B. So item 13, exclusion.
Just need the formal resolution.
Yeah. Yeah, so you move to part B?
Yep.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah.
Councillor Walker? That's approved. Are we then going to, you still record this, right?
No, actually, if that's right, shall I stop it now? The recording?
Well, it won't. You can carry on recording it as long as it's taken out of the public.
Oh, I can take it off at the end.
Yeah.